Okay, as I discussed in class, this screencast is going to just barely introduce Chapter 20, the New Deal in the 1930s. So if you have not yet downloaded the outline from Moodle, that's the first thing you need to do. And then we're just going to talk about, we're going to start talking about the election that immediately follows Herbert Hoover's first term in office, and that is the election of 1932. So he is going to run as the Republican candidate for re-election. It was probably not a wise idea that the Republicans would choose to run him as their candidate because of how unpopular he had become, but the Republicans do not feel that they will personally blame Hoover for the Depression, so they think he has a chance. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, is going to run a two-term governor of New York who is very reform-minded, and his name is Franklin D. Roosevelt, and he should be pretty well known to all of you. He is the distant cousin to Theodore Roosevelt. And he was very open about wanting to work with the U.S. government to combat all of the problems that the Great Depression had caused, specifically unemployment and poverty. And it will be fairly easy for Franklin Roosevelt to win this election, and at the same time, more Democrats will once again take on seats in both the House and Senate, and this will help laws pass easily through Congress and get ratified by and signed into law by the president. One of the first things that takes place during or right after Roosevelt's election is that the 20th Amendment is officially ratified, which moved presidential inaugurations to January instead of in springtime. This isn't going to apply to Roosevelt, actually. He was not elected until after this January had passed, but he'll be elected or inaugurated at the same normal time, but moving forward, this is why all inaugurations take place in January. In the meantime, waiting for his inauguration, FDR will create a team of trusted advisors that he describes as or refers to as the Brain Trust. And this will be a team made up of different people from different professions, professors, lawyers, financial advisors, journalists, bankers, and together he plans on using this team to help him create a plan of action to address all of the problems within the Great Depression. They will work and create the plan he will implement that we all refer to as the New Deal. So the New Deal is Roosevelt's plan to alleviate the problems of the Great Depression. There are 3 overall goals of the New Deal, and they all start with the letter R, and those goals are relief, recovery, and reform. And that is relief for the needy, economic recovery, and financial reform moving forward to prevent this from happening again. Keep in mind that the New Deal will encompass all of the different pieces of legislation that pass out of the White House during this time. So the New Deal is not one law, it's several laws. All of these laws and plans are part of Roosevelt's New Deal. The 100 days is what we refer to as the first 100 days that FDR was in office. It is a period of very intense activity because he's a very proactive president from the get-go. Congress will pass more than 15 pieces of major legislation, which may not sound like a lot, but in the grand scheme and respective to today, that's a lot of law. That's a large amount of laws in a short amount of time. He will also implement what is called the bank holiday. He will essentially temporarily close all banks to prevent people from being able to withdraw money from those banks. The mass withdrawal is only making problems worse in the economy, so he's wanting to put that to a pause. He's also going to implement the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which is kind of coinciding with the bank holiday. This will authorize the U.S. Department of Treasury to inspect all of the country's banks, and those that are stable would be allowed to reopen, and those that were unable had to temporarily remain closed until they could work out their problems with the federal government's assistance. And the last thing I want to quickly address was something that FDR did that kind of set him apart from prior presidents. He gave what were called Fireside Chats. He's one of the first presidents to consistently address the American people via the radio. And in these talks, he's essentially addressing the nation about issues and public concern over the Great Depression, and he also talks about the government's New Deal efforts. He makes a special effort to explain all of the New Deal programs that the New Deal has to offer and the government is offering to the people, and he's also explaining to them things like what happened with the stock market and what's going on with banks. He talks to the American people in a way that which the average American could understand. They had never really been taught these things about the economy before in school, so he educates them and makes them kind of restore their faith in banks. And I think the reason they called them the Fireside Chats is because all the family would gather around the radio, which is near the fire, in their kind of den or living room area, and that is where they're hearing from the president. Alright, so if you have any questions about this little introduction, we'll pick up with some of the New Deal agencies tomorrow. You can write them all down, and I will see y'all in class tomorrow.